Justin Hunt is the founder of DLF. Justin, hello there. How are you doing?
Hi, Clive. Yeah, very well. Good to see you.
Are you looking forward to today's session?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that it's a massive challenge for organisations at the moment, to especially legacy organisations, to make that shift to becoming digital, and that involves a huge amount of work. That involves development of new skills, and also that involves attracting the right kind of people with those digital skills to help you take your organisation forward so that you can engage effectively with digital customers. So this is a really critical area for all organisations to be thinking about.
So many of the conversations we have at DLF around other topics, they tend to come back to talent, don't they? We talk about technology, we talk about innovation, we talk about AI. And so often the conversation brings itself back to, do you have the right people with the right skills and the right motivations?
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of companies who are navigating change at the moment, who, looking at introducing new technology platforms, they all recognise the importance of having people at the centre of what they're doing, and also having the right people at the centre of it. And what we're doing here at the Digital Leadership Forum is that we want to help people in organisations navigate this world of accelerating change. And so what we're doing is that, this is the first session of the new year. We appreciate people are busy. It's great to have people here who can contribute to the discussion, but we provide year-round programming, which is designed to keep you ahead of the curve. And so today is an opportunity to meet with experts, your peers, startups and academics, in order to help you stay ahead of the curve.
I like the way you put that, Justin, that this is about helping people navigate. We live in exciting times, don't we? There are exciting changes, but they can feel a little confusing sometimes, a little scary. And if we can help each other navigate through this, we can all make the very best of things and see the potential that's here.
I think absolutely, Clive. And, I hope everyone who's here, if they enjoy the session, which hopefully they will, they'll share their invites and encourage people to get involved with us. I think that in a period of such change, constant learning is what is required. And that is what we're looking to build upon and develop through the community that we're building here.
Excellent. Well, look, Justin, thanks so much for setting the scene. Justin is full of knowledge, full of ideas. You'll probably find him popping up in the chat area as today's event unfolds. So do feel free to join him there, to chip in with your thoughts, your observations, your reactions. That's a big part of what today is all about. So before we get started on our conversation, I think I just want to launch a little bit of a poll. So I just want to offer you a question here, which you can see on your screens. I want to ask, which key trends are impacting on the talent market this year so far? You can tick multiple answers for this one. Is it the widening talent gap? Are unsustainable salary hikes an item of concern for you? Increased hiring from within the organisation, is that not so much a problem, but a trend or a change that you're seeing within your world? AI, chatbots, again, the impact of technology on talent, is that changing the way things work? Is it speeding up the recruitment process and making that candidate experience a quicker, slicker thing? And flexibility, career progression. Are you having to change the offer to your employers in terms of what they look to, what they ask of you as an employer? So I'll give that just a few more seconds. Do feel free to click more than one answer here, because we know that this is a complex area with multiple factors at play. So don't hold back. You can click as many of those as you feel are appropriate. And then I will, let's share that now and just see how things are looking. The two, obviously, as you can see there, the two leading things people are talking about or concerned about, the widening talent gap. 71% of you have identified that as an item of relevance, which is huge. And then that other one, flexibility and career progression, the need to have a valuable offer, an attractive offer that people can see and they can feel attracted to. And the other items there have also attracted a fair bit of interest. But there we go. That seems to be the lie of the land. That seems to be the things on people's minds. I'm going to turn to Vicky now, Vicky Knight of BPP. Hello there, Vicky.
Hi, Clive. Good afternoon.
Hello there. What do you make of those poll results in terms of the things people are concerned about?
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess I'm not that surprised by the widening talent gap and the flexibility and career progression coming out so strongly. And I know that we'll be hearing not only in some of the comments I'm making, but also, excuse me, from Neem and Olivia around those issues. I'm slightly surprised that we're not seeing more people looking at those salary hikes because, you know, there are stories coming from around the world, and perhaps they're rather apocryphal, about, you know, what people are looking for in terms of salary. And there's certainly, there is some salary inflation in the system, particularly in tight labour markets such as Singapore. We're seeing it in the UK as well, as I'm sure you know. So, yeah, interesting.
I'd like to explore these ideas with you in a little more detail, Vicky, but some of us have met you on our previous events. It's been great to get your insight. But for people who possibly haven't met you before or haven't worked with BPP before, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so thanks. Well, Vicky Knight, Associate Dean of International Programs based in beautiful Singapore. BPP Education is a global education group. So we work around the world with leading companies in you know, we've heard about that talent gap, in trying to narrow that talent gap by creating professional education programs that ensures that businesses have the talent and the people they need through education. So, yeah, all about education and training the BPP team across Asia Pacific.
Well, look, the first question I have is can we get some clarity on what we mean by the widening talent gap? It's a term we're using here. What do we mean by that?
So I think, you know, all businesses are trying to project their needs. And of course, in this increasingly digital world, we're seeing roles that perhaps traditionally didn't need those kind of skills now requiring them. So there's a kind of new baseline of digital skills in particular that's of relevance to this group that every employee needs to have. I think we're moving away from a space where, you know, the clever tech people sit in a particular office and it's only them that have to understand digital or data. And we're moving to a space where regardless of your role, regardless of your job, and actually regardless of your seniority, which is an interesting conversation in itself, you need a new set of skills for the age in which we're living in. So that's in the digital and data space. And as businesses think about what they're trying to achieve, what their strategic kind of objectives are, they need to ensure that they have the right people in the right place at the right time with the right skills. And that is problematic. It's not easy to get that right in terms of understanding what you need, you know, the HR and L&D people, the strategic work they need to do to make sure they know what various business lines are needing, and then getting that in place and making the decisions about, well, do you recruit it in? Do you train and promote up? I mean, there are a lot of decisions to make about actually delivering to your strategic HR needs. But ignoring that skills gap, you do so at your peril.
Right, and that's a really key point you make there, isn't it? That we're not talking anymore about a world in which siloed sets of skills operate separately. There's a strand of digital competence that needs to be running through everybody.
Absolutely. And I would say that's the same with data. And I would say it's the same with people skills too. You know, one of my favorite subjects is, you know, how leadership has changed, for example. But that starts at, you know, quite low in an organization, just a team leader role, for example. You know, command and control is gone. So how do you make sure your people have the right approach, the right mindset, the right way of working with their teams to ensure that they keep their talent? And again, this is going to come up through the conversations we have today. You know, retention is also an issue. You know, where you have skills gaps, where you have tight labour markets, you can have retention issues. And those organisations that are not attentive to the needs of their people will lose their people. And that is something that every leader needs to think about. That is not the responsibility of HR, because we all know very often people actually leave their jobs because of the cultural sort of culture of the organisation or the leadership styles in the organisation. So it's now everyone's job to work on culture, employee experience, you know, and so on. So, you know, again, you can't just say, "Great, I can get on with what I do." We all have to be part of creating great organisations for people to work in.
Now, something that understandably cropped up last year in many of our conversations, of course, was the impact of the pandemic in terms of facilitating this change, accelerating this change. As we're moving into a time now where we're kind of moving on with the rest of life, do you think that accelerated period of change is over and those changes are now here to stay, or are we still in that period of acceleration?
Yes and no. I think both is the answer, unfortunately, for digital leaders, because as always, they have to juggle everything at once. So I think digital will continue to dominate the growth agenda in 2022. But on the other hand, I think we also need to take stock a little bit. Many of us rushed to new ways of working and introduced new technologies. I mean, who'd heard of Zoom 2 years ago, for example? So much has changed. And I think it is important for us to just take stock of the changes we made. Which ones are good? Which ones do we want to keep? And which do we need to jettison? So I think, yes, we have to still keep looking forward. But I think a stock-taking exercise and some reflection on the journey that we've been on in the last couple of years is an important leadership item for 22 as well.
And on that topic then, when you take stock as someone who's an expert in this field, you've mentioned there changes which are welcome and which are positive, but changes possibly which are less so. What's your take on where that division comes? Which are the things that you think have helped us, and which do you think are things we could possibly do without?
Well, I mean, flexibility, I think, would come up as number one. It came up in the poll. I know we're going to hear from Olivia and Neem on that subject as well. People have enjoyed flexibility, but your flexibility and my flexibility are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I think whilst we continue to embrace the concepts of flexibility and try and make them work in our organizations, we have to recognize that at the same time, we're working with the most diverse, multi-generational and complex workforce in history. And that means that I think we're going to see a bit of a move to personalization in terms of employee experience, or that trend is going to really come to the fore in 22, because, as I say, what works for one person doesn't work for another. And that's going to be, it's a big ask of our HR teams, again, to manage that single-handedly. So leadership at all levels are going to be involved in trying to work out, okay, here is the basic template of the flexibility that my organization has on the table, but what does that look like for each of the people in my team? So there's a lot to be done there on kind of personalizing the offer around flexibility. I don't think everyone go to an online yoga class is going to cut it in 2022. Might have been a great new initiative in 2020 or 21, and we all appreciated it. But I think there's got to be more offerings and more personalization moving forward.
Sure. So one size does certainly not fit all. And that initial sort of novelty that we may have appreciated 18 months ago, we're now looking at what is a long-term good practice in terms of looking after your people. Yeah. I've got a couple more things I'm keen to ask Vicky about, but I'm also keen to welcome any questions that everyone else has. We're lucky to have Vicky here, who's very much an expert on looking at the talents and the skills that people need to thrive in our business world today. So do pitch in and chat with anything that you'd like to put to Vicky, and I'll happily help you to do that. But Vicky, there was something I'm also keen to ask you about. We hear a lot and we discuss a lot about what's called ESG these days, don't we? The ESG agenda, environment, social, governance. What's your take on that and how it relates to this piece around talent?
Again, I think it's front and center of the leadership agenda for 2022. I don't think kind of bland statements of good intent are really going to cut it much longer. So I would say that purpose, if you want, as a way of thinking about ESG, is going to be increasingly important to employees. So again, from a talent perspective, people want to know that they're working for purpose. I mean, I know we're going to be talking about the Great Resignation at some point today, but a surprising number of people, despite all the economic uncertainty, have quit their jobs. It's been dubbed the Great Resignation, and we're seeing it, all over the world in different economies. And that really gives you pause for thought in a time when there is such uncertainty. You think people would be clinging to jobs, but actually, people have been recalibrating their personal and their professional lives. And in the context of this, unbelievable situation we've all lived through, people are going, well, what's important? And I think from a business perspective, your people want to feel as though they're working for purpose. So I think leaders need to think clearly about, what does that mean in my organization? How can my people get up every day and know what they're doing is bringing value to other people's lives. On top of that, of course, the sustainability agenda, largely being driven by outside of the organization. That's customers who are saying, we want to check your green credentials. Again, it's a mixed picture across industries, across the globe. But that customer demand, at least to choose the better of two options, for example, is making businesses reflect on their environmental credentials. Then I would say that all of those elements, the E, the S, and the G being the governance piece, investors are also driving a real focus. So if you're publicly listed, or if you're in financial services, you will know that really it's in the investment space that ESG is really driving change in businesses, where investors are demanding that your ESG credentials are up to scratch. And there is a lot of work going on across all sorts of industries. And I think we'll see a lot more come out of that in 2022, as I say, where people are going to have to start moving away from sort of bland statements to actually reporting effectively on how they are performing in the ESG space.
So on that first point you made, are you saying then that we need to recognise that our offer to our employees is possibly these days less transactional than it has been? It's not just a matter of, here's your salary, Definitely. Here's your package. There's something more human, more emotional going on?
Definitely. I think that's where the purpose piece comes in, and how it does link to the ESG agenda. Absolutely. I think people want to feel that what they're doing is worthwhile. It's so interesting how many people have jumped out of the employment market simply because they don't want to be in it, and they're thinking again about their priorities and what it means to have the time they want to pursue their hobbies, or to be with their families, or to travel around. Not that you can anymore, but whatever it is they want to do. People want that time. So I think we're going to see the rise of things like sabbaticals alongside things like flexibility in some organizations. Because if somebody wants 3 months off, it's better to let them have it than for them to walk from the business if they are a key asset to you. So I think, purpose is going to be a conversation that businesses and leaders need to be having this year, for sure.
I see an observation has just popped up in chat from Paul Haswell. I remember us chatting to Paul at one of our events last year. Paul, I don't know if you're in a position where you want to come onto microphone and or camera and express that to us, because I always value your contributions. If that's
sure.
Hi there.
Turn everything up. I wasn't expecting to speak. I mean, I've just switched jobs, which is interesting. So I suppose I'm one of the great resignation, but there we go. They're not necessarily for the reasons we discussed. I do think that there is now a perception that people aren't willing just to work for a paycheck, or because they think an organization is prestigious. And I've noticed this in the legal sector as well, which is a bit of a surprise. Do you remember when I was training as a lawyer, it was all just, let's go for the biggest salary and hope for the best. People don't do that. And I think a lot of the response to that in lots of organizations, from the largest to the smaller ones, has been to try and frame what their purpose is. And I think people have thought that's ticking the box. By doing that, we say our purpose is to make life better for everyone, or to do something fantastic in the environment. They forget that then employees are by their very nature quite cynical, and they see through it. And when they see through it and see that it's just lip service, or worse still, a marketing tool just to create more business rather than to actually make life better for people as they think it will be, they are quick to criticize and then become very cynical workforce, and then in many cases then just leave. And I think that's pretty endemic. If you read, I'm terrible for reading the comments in the press. I get obsessed with reading, which is the bottom half of the internet. Whenever you see an article about how a business has got this new resolve to do X or Y brilliant things, you can see how cynical people are below. Some of them have got an axe to grind, fair enough. But you'd be foolish to think that's not happening within the organisation as well.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable point. Thanks so much for sharing that, Paul.
Completely agree. And it is so interesting about the legal profession. I'm sure you saw the news in Singapore in the last week about the number of lawyers leaving the industry, and causing some surprise, because this is something you've trained for a very long time. This is not something you've fallen into. It's a long journey to get into those positions and to walk away. is something that needs real explanation. And, I think keeping your finger on the pulse. I mean, are you listening to what your people are saying is really, really important, because if you don't understand that, it's really going to make the difference this year, because people will suddenly be gone. And it's too late to deal with it then. Yeah, absolutely. And people, you're right, people see through the bland statements. It's got to go beyond that, and it's got to be meaningful in some way. Now, that's not to say every single organization is going to get to the top of the ESG tree on day one, but it is to say that if you are setting out a journey, that needs to be honest and it needs to be real, however small the steps are. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is just that it feels authentic.
Now, Vicky, there's probably many of us listening to this thinking, brilliant, this is what I believe in, what opportunities we've got here to create, happier, healthier, more productive, more innovative workforces. But there's probably also a strand of people very concerned about this. Would it be overplaying this to describe it as a potential crisis? Should some of us be very worried?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think for all of those reasons, not just things like the resignations, not just things like labour market shortages and multi-generational workforces and the search for purpose. I mean, there are so many complexities, in the people's space that I think were sort of bubbling under the surface throughout the pandemic, and I think they're going to be really on the agenda in 22. I think now is the time to address them and not just try and kind of put a band-aid over it. Do I think it's a talent crisis? Well, look at our own poll results, not the scientific poll, but from our colleagues here today. 71% of people on this session think there is a talent gap that is significant.
Yeah.
That means your organization is underperforming. I mean, there's no two ways around that. If people don't have the right skills, you are not performing in the way that you could. Yeah. And I think it's all very well for chief execs to have brilliant, mission statements and visions. And of course, that's important. But if you haven't got, the organizational muscle or the implementation capability, it's just a statement on a piece of paper. So getting that right, getting your people strategy right is absolutely critical. And yes, I do think it is approaching a crisis situation, because the leading companies in these areas, those companies that have been dealing with this and doing something about it over the last 3 to 5 years are already significantly ahead. So if that isn't you and your company, you're already behind, and you need to kind of catch up, and that's even harder. It's hard to attract top talent, and obviously we'll hear more from Neem on that. It's hard to attract top talent if they see you as a bit of a backwater and not one of the early adopters. Yeah. So it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I think I get a sense that what you've introduced to us there is being recognised by quite a few people. I think there's a few nodding heads. I see a lovely comment here from Lawrence Smith of Picture Wealth, who's put a comment in the chat talking about the idea of purpose and leadership behaviours and HR policies having to change. And he's made the brilliant observation that at DBS they changed to make banking joyful as their purpose, but then they had to realign everything to actually make that real. And I think that says a lot, doesn't it? Talking about purpose, talking about those compelling sets of words that sound good on an annual report, but actually making the changes to make that culture real, that's a challenge.
Yeah, if you say it, you really have to do it. Or that cynicism, will kick in, and that'll be both within your organisation, but also your customers too. They can feel the authenticity, or whether it's just greenwash or whatever it may be.
Vicky, I always enjoy chatting to you because I think you always cut to the really important stuff. You cut through the flannel and the waffle and help us confront the real challenges and the opportunities we're dealing with here. So thank you so much for getting us started. But let's broaden this conversation out there now. Vicky's already given us a few things to think about. Let's introduce our next speakers. We've got Neem from Haze and Olivia Kane from LinkedIn. Olivia, Neem, hello there.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Hi. Good, thank you. I was just going to say, Vicky, you kind of have you've even mentioned my yoga joke on further down. So you were spot on with a lot of your observations. So no, it's some really exciting stuff to talk about for sure.
Brilliant. Well, look, I've got a few questions I'm looking forward to asking the three of you now. We're in this sort of broader group. But any reactions you have to anything Vicky has mentioned so far?
I think there were a couple of things that really, really jumped out at me. One note, and I think we're going to get into it a little bit later, is this note on flexibility. Flexibility is definitely going to be something that is going to be looked for and sought after. And we need to think already next steps of how flexibility is going to be changing our workforce. And if people are wanting flexible policies, flexible working environments as well, that's going to be potentially creating an age of autonomy of employees joining the workforce. And are organizations equipped for that potential progression? Because I have a feeling that a lot of things that COVID has really thrusted to us are going to stay. I mean, we are all here sitting on Zoom. Work has invaded our homes. And I love that, Vicky, you touched on the recalibration piece. Myself, I'm seeing it across my LinkedIn feed. People are recalibrating their work boundaries. They're recalibrating how work plays in their life, their families, every aspect of their lives to see, okay, what actually makes the most sense, especially staying mentally sound as well, after we've gone through what we've gone through for the last 2 years.
And Neem, was there anything Vicky said that, other than your yoga joke, which we're always up for hearing a joke twice, that's not a problem, but is there anything else Vicky said that particularly resounded with you?
Upskilling everyone. So Vicky, when you mentioned about traditionally always used to be that senior market and then that top down teaching people how to learn, what to learn, and that certainly sometimes leadership from a skill set had certain skills that no one else needed. But change management, again, we'll touch on it later, but change management, being agile, all these buzzwords that we talk about, we now actually have to put in place. And it's always very exciting to see how people really pick up that change, that growth mindset, really. So I think that, plus the flexibility that Olivia and Vicky talked about, flexible isn't just working from home. That's actually been there, gone. It's everything else when it comes to your soft skills and your hard skills as well. So it's a interesting time for all of us, I think, 2022 and 23.
Well, I've got a bunch of things I'd like to ask the three of you about. As before, do everyone else pitch in with your questions, your observations within chat. But before we go too much deeper, recognising that we don't all know each other here, we haven't all met each other, could I just maybe ask you, Olivia and Neem, I'll start with Olivia, to tell us a little bit about who you are, your role at LinkedIn, and what expertise you're bringing to this particular table.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clive. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's really awesome talking about this compelling topic that has so many dimensions. So my name is Olivia Kane. I have been at LinkedIn for almost 5 years now. I'm working both in Hong Kong and Singapore. I'm pretty much born and raised in Singapore. And my expertise is really about content strategy. So I am LinkedIn's in-house content strategist, and I consult against a lot of various companies and organizations from mid-sized to enterprise level. And really what I consult on is content strategies across talent media as well as marketing. And I'm really starting to see this bridge where talent brand is becoming front and center, and especially leveraging a platform like LinkedIn. And I help organizations on how they can unlock that and how to build those strategies.
So we've been talking about the need to have that clear purpose, that clear culture, that clear idea about what it's like to be part of an organization. Are you suggesting that there's more need now for organizations to express that fluently and adequately so that people can really see what they're becoming part of?
Absolutely. And we also need to think about our audience. We're looking at millennials and Gen Zers who are actually taking the lead in shifting these roles in the Great Resignation predominantly. They are incredibly digitally savvy. Why aren't HR talent organizations becoming digitally savvy to meet savvy? We need to be really communicating to them on a new level. And really what a strategy looks at is not only being able to communicate your EVS, your purpose, your vision, or what you're actually doing, where you're putting, I guess, your money where your mouth is actually talking about what is a candidate journey. It takes about 7 to 9 months for a candidate to first, know of your company to actually apply. What pieces of content are you actually supplying to help your candidate along that journey to make sure that you're top of mind? So that's really where I come in to say, what's your content strategy? How do we build that? And what is going to make it unique to your organization so you can get the talent that you want?
Brilliant. I love this. The fact that we can decide our vision and our purpose, but unless we communicate that adequately, then who knows? Brilliant. Thanks, Olivia. And Neem, we're also joined by you, Neem Locke of Haze. For those of us who haven't met you before, give us a little taster of you, your role, and what you're into.
I'm a long-term server at Haze. So I've been here 23 years. I've covered the UK market and then New Zealand for quite a few years, and now in Singapore. And I've touched on both the internal recruitment market, some bits that Olivia has talked about, internal recruitment and recruitment marketing, which is a relatively new term, but accelerating fast. And then now helping my clients find HR people across the spectrum, both from junior to senior people as well. So recruitment is in my blood, I would say.
Excellent. Well, look, thanks for bringing that experience and that expertise to this conversation. Now, we heard from Vicky earlier, her view on some of the trends we're seeing, and I think we all agreed with so much of everything Vicky said. Are there any other additional trends that you feel that you've recognised that we're needing to take into account at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. I'll touch on a bit of what Vicky mentioned. Having worked in all these countries and in recruitment for so long, I've never seen a boom like this. And we'll talk a bit more further about why that's happened with the Great Resignation as well. But there is certainly in Asia and Singapore particularly, I have seen lots of organisations from the US, from the UK and Australia, New Zealand that have traditionally had only small hubs in Singapore and Asia. What they now realise, and whether that's pandemic related or not, is that they need people on the ground. And that means HR cover, tech cover, for example. So I've seen a lot of satellite offices in Asia become regional hubs. And that means they're pouring talent into Singapore and Asia as well. Startups are going through major hyper growth. They tend to sit around that tech space, but greenfields, brownfield organizations that are really ramping up their growth. Pharmaceuticals, life sciences as well. I see a lot of requirement for talent there as well. And, there's this unique situation with talent acquisition. So recruiters reflect the market. Olivia, you mentioned you've got to match what the millennials are looking at. And so, for example, in Haze in Singapore alone, since July, we've added, I'd say, 30 to our headcount, 20 sitting within tech. So that reflects what is required in our market. And talent acquisition, for example, is not just enough to have a talent acquisition person for a company. You now need a TA for tech. You need a TA for MarTech. You need a TA for the corporate services, HR. And that's mirroring what we do in recruitment, but internally as well. And contracting, it's a relatively new concept in Asia. I come from a contracting background myself, and it's very mature in the UK and in ANZ as well. Not so much, I don't think, in the US, but may need to fact check me on that. But in Asia, it's a new concept. Traditionally, people didn't see contracting as something they saw it as a hindrance, but actually coming on to somebody else's point about adapting to lifestyle. If you want to do 3 months of a contracting and then go traveling when we can, or take some time out, contracting allows that. And we've seen that assists people looking in the market. But from an employer perspective, you've got all these projects that have been on the shelf for so long. And on top of that, an urgent need for resource. So tapping into that contracting market where you've got a headcount that may not sit with you permanently, but you can put them in one project, skill them up, move them to another project for another 3 months, let them go off wherever they want to, and then come back. So there's a lot of trends and new trends that are coming in, not ones that we've seen before, I would say. I know I could go on, but my last point would be counteroffers and the extension of notice periods. I would say our counteroffers have probably doubled again, Vicky, I was surprised about the poll and the salary hike not being one of those big spikes. So I see counter offers 25-30% happening in the market. Now, will that mean those people will look again in 6 months? I'm pretty sure they will, because money is not the main reason people stay or leave. But this extension of notice periods has also meant that not just senior directors, but HR executives, junior people in tech, they're all being tied into 3 months. And so employers are now having to look at buying out and then paying pre-bonuses as well. So lots of trends, lots of challenges in the market at the moment.
Thanks, Neem. I'm keen to move to Olivia to get your thoughts, but I do have one question for you, Neem, on something you said there. You mentioned the sort of the change from having satellite offices to regional hubs and the idea of sort of geographic distribution. Does our new approach to flexible working, to remote working, how does that sit alongside that idea? The fact that if I'm a specialist in a certain market, a certain country, do I need to be on the ground in that country? Has that picture got more variable?
I'd say yes and no. I would say depending on the role, so maybe for technical roles, they can be outsourced to where you're sitting at home in Denmark and doing that work. But I would say from a people-orientated HR perspective that we've talked about here, in fact, HR from America or the UK, it doesn't work here. I mean, there's a requirement for people to be on the ground remember HR. If we talk about HR particularly, people want to have someone to go to when they need help. And time zones don't allow that. So I would say yes in some technical aspects. And again, I'd like to know some research on that. But for the majority of cases, as HR comes in, that means marketing, content, etc. That probably needs to be on the ground. Maybe from Singapore could facilitate the rest of Asia, or Hong Kong or Malaysia. But I think trying to get your content or marketing people from the US, trying to understand the Asia market is a bit of a challenge.
Speaking of content, let's move to Olivia. Olivia, your take on the trends that you identify, whether they've been mentioned already or additional ideas. What do you think's going on?
Well, I mean, Microsoft owns LinkedIn, and of course, I've got a stat from a Microsoft Work Trend Index. But I think what's making me really stop and think is we often think of, what the last 2 years have brought us and all the change and what we're doing right now. But these changes are going to continue to happen because the report actually states that 41% of employees are considering to leave their current employer this year. And what's going to happen the year after that and the year after that? I think that is going to take a long time for this to decelerate. And this voluntary exodus is actually being driven by our youngest workers. I know I mentioned that it's millennials and Gen Zers as well. And I just find that really, really interesting. And I'm not seeing the talent brand marketing adapt quickly enough for this. I'm still seeing very kind of archaic content, the same kind of cookie cutter stories, employee stories that are being, dished out. But what I think is really interesting and something that I've even seen internally at LinkedIn, because we're constantly looking for people as well. You're seeing managers get on, video and put it on their newsfeed. My manager asked me to do a video with him for a couple of roles that we have open because we just need to cut through. We need to communicate to people and make sure that we can stand out. So I think that's one key area. And another is, interestingly enough, how the C-suite is working differently together. The role of the CMO is increasingly becoming important alongside the CHRO to steward the talent brand post-pandemic. And I think that this is a really interesting collaboration and intersection of these two roles. And it leads me to a third point, which is if we see the CMO and the CHRO starting to work together, we are potentially going to be looking at companies creating a unified brand, a unified messaging that covers talent, consumer, and corporate. No longer are we working in silos. How are we actually all coming together with that singular, authentic message that can be really actioned across all touch points?
That's really interesting that Vicky mentioned earlier, the idea of silos breaking down within the sort of the workforce as a whole. But you're saying at that C-suite level, those distinctions between those decision-making roles are coming together and being more of a unified team. Vicky, what do you make of these ideas that Olivia and Neem have brought along?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was really, really interested. I mean, two things that stuck out. Yes, that point about the sort of de-siloization. And I would add, for CHROs, I mean, number one, the notion actually that you have a CHRO, I mean, to put HR actually at that level, I think is just a reflection of where we are with the significance of people and culture in organizations. And I think there's an interesting interface, which many people, in a digital leadership conversation, will know about, is the interface, of course, between the IT, the senior technology officer, and the senior HR person as well. Again, because it's no good introducing your fabulous new tech if your people, have got the wrong message about it or don't have the skills to use it or whatever. So I think there's some really interesting new configurations coming together at the C-suite. And then to pick up on Neem's point about the flexibility in the contract and all the rest of it, I mean, there's some recent research published where it's gone so far as to talk about we're moving into a post-job age. So actually, we won't have a job with a title and a job description in traditional terms any longer. It's really the projectization of work, which means that you might jump from a major one-year project to a small 3-month project. And again, that is going to create an internal talent market and the ultimate flexibility, because essentially, if you are literally applying for a range of different projects rather than this is my title and I do these same things, day in, day out, that's a very dynamic trend that I think we are going to start to see emerging, certainly in the top tech firms. But beyond that, this sense that people will jump from one project group and project team to another, and they might be using different skills depending on the project that they're working on. Maybe they'll be the lead marketing person in whatever team they're working on, but it might be that they're asked to switch that up and perhaps do a different type of communications or a different type, maybe a leadership role on a different team.
Yeah.
So it's about bringing teams together to work on specific projects in a post-job world.
I really like the way the language is evolving to reflect what we're dealing with. And that simple thing you said there about the move from job to work, which it seems trivial, but then actually when you think about the idea you've expressed there, that actually says quite a lot. I love that. Lovely comment here from Nathaniel, one of the DLF team, who's pointed out that a lot of candidates are interested now in knowing how companies have handled the pandemic and treated their employees. So we've spoken about the pandemic as an accelerator of change, but also maybe quite an alarming idea for some of us is the idea, does it act as a litmus test to say, well, how well did these companies put their money where their mouth is? How did they treat people? And let's judge them on that. Yeah.
And just to add to that as well, Clive, it's so interesting. I recently saw Pinterest, Hootsuite, quite a few of these tech companies publicly publish their new policies that are actually COVID related. They've got specific COVID leave. They've got so many adaptations. And I think it's not only how you were treated or how a company is treating you, but how agile is the policy making of your organization? How quickly are you able to adapt and say, right, this is a pressing need. We're going to be giving mental health days or something that can be, I don't know about how permanent they could actually be or how employees would feel about them ebbing and flowing or changing. But for example, what LinkedIn launched this summer was half-day Fridays. And they said through the months of July and August, Fridays are half-day. And then, that kind of quietly goes away and then you move on to something else. But again, how agile is your organization in being able to react in keeping your employees happy?
And Olivia, that requires the organization to have its finger on the pulse of its people as well. I mean, to come, 100%. You could just pull something off the shelf and go, oh, people are a bit down, let's give them this. But actually, it's about the responsiveness. Is that what it is at that moment that people are needing? And the better that you can listen and understand what people want, of course, the better your response will be to their needs.
Well, and this would have been a perfect segue for Neem's yoga joke.
Yes, right. Come on, Neem. It's time to share.
No, you have to wait for that. It's going to be such a, it's not even a joke. It was just a comment. So we're going to have to wait, Olivia. I'm not telling you until later on if we get time.
I really like that point that Olivia touched on there about the overlap between the internal communication and the external message. The fact that we as consumers have a perception and have a judgment of the way a company treats its people. That is in itself part of that brand. The two overlap, don't they? And I really like that point. Neem, I have a question for you. Vicky used a term earlier, desalarisation. I always love a new word. The idea that salary is no longer, even less than it ever was, the be-all and end-all of things. So acknowledging that, what are the things that we need to be? Let us be a bit more specific now. What are the things that organisations are really having to ensure they do offer their people, their candidates, in order to be seen as valuable?
I think, we talk about attracting talent. Nat actually talked about it, asked that question about when it comes to what candidates are really wanting from employers, right? And the number one question I get from candidates is, what did they do during COVID? So, for example, were redundancies made? Did senior management get any pay cuts? Were they linked? Have bonuses been frozen? And on top of that, what's their wellness program? Flexibility from a hybrid perspective is a given. No company, apart from essential services, can say we can't do that, we don't do that. But it's the policy that will happen post-COVID as well. So I think candidates are a lot, when talent is in short supply and candidates have multiple offers, their expectation of employers increases tenfold. And so they will question how they dealt with the pandemic for sure. They'll be looking at stability and strategic foresight. So it's not enough to tell a potential candidate, this is what we want. Well, now employers need to explain how you're going to get there. Because again, we talk about all the big fluffy words, but how are you going to really get there? And as a potential candidate, will I have the resources to be able to get there? Yeah. I think, again, we talked about technology being a given, but we mentioned about regional hubs as well. Candidates want to know what kind of hours that involves. We don't have a physical door to shut on work anymore. And that means, if there is an expectation of clients doing late calls with their regional or their head office in the US or the UK, does that mean the next day they can start a bit later? Or they don't really want to ask permission anymore? They should be, again, being treated as adults.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely a bigger gap between individuals that want to work for these really hyper-growth, fast-moving organizations versus those individuals that want stability. I imagine LinkedIn have some stat with regards to millennials versus the older generation of what they want, but I haven't seen that in the market yet. I see a variety of age groups wanting to work for different organizations as well. I'm not sure if that quite answered your question, Clive. Hopefully it did.
No, fine. Absolutely. I think the point you made there about people asking about have there been any pay cuts, did you mean among the workforce generally or among senior leaders?
Yeah, so as candidates, when they asked me what was this organization's response to COVID, did they make redundancies? Say, for example, no or yes. Did senior management, were they paid their bonus? Because
and that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's not what I get, but how much does this organisation believe in justice and fairness?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's all those empty, those amazing words about wellness, about treating our people. It's really, when push came to shove, did that happen?
Sure.
Did those people, when the market did take an uptake, did those people that were made redundant, unfortunately, were they called back? So very specific questions from candidates at all levels.
Yeah,
they really are questioning employers and making sure they can back them up.
Olivia, do you know, in terms of that question that Neem pondered there about the difference in expectation between perhaps different demographics, different age groups, are there universal themes or does it vary?
Well, I think I can definitely speak from probably a Gen Z millennial perspective, since they're kind of the drivers in this great reshuffle. I mean, we're calling it, from a LinkedIn perspective, the great reshuffle or the great resignation, but either way, it's pretty great what we're going through. But we did have a LinkedIn Talent Drivers survey, and the most important priorities for candidates overall would be work-life balance, comp and ben. I mean, that's not a surprise there. Colleagues and culture. But I think, interestingly, the fastest growing since COVID is flex work arrangements, an inclusive workplace. And this is really where talent branding comes into place. How do you demonstrate this? How do you authentically communicate that you're inclusive? If you want to do that, check out Canva. Canva are extremely talented at their talent branding. Yeah. And then lastly, work-life balance. Again, we are going through this great recalibration of boundaries of, I've got a toddler, and sometimes I need to attend to toddler things, which means that I'll get back to you when it suits me, not necessarily when it suits the organization. Of course, there are key deliverables, and of course, there are key calls, but I get to choose when I work on that deliverable. And I think that's, where flexibility is going to evolve, where autonomy is going to evolve. And really, it's just going to it's not only a candidate market right now, it's going to be really an employee-driven industry of, this is how I work, deal with it.
So, Vicky, some really strong points there from Olivia about the true meaning of flexibility, and from Neem about looking at how the culture of a company really expresses itself in its tough decisions. Any thoughts on what we've heard there?
Well, yes, I suppose the thing that comes to mind really in response to that is just, what does retention look like? It's a word we haven't really used yet. But retaining your staff, once you've gone through all the drama and all the amount of time it takes and money and investment to recruit and onboard and bring people in, what is retention going to look like? I think, Olivia's touched on this idea that it's going to be, the employees are going to be saying, look, this is actually what I need to do. So it will be a problem if the answer is no. I mean, people aren't really even looking for permission. They're saying, this is what I need to do. I have to go and do this thing. I have an obligation to my family, or I have to, whatever it may be. And it's up to us as leaders and as organizations to work with that situation. If you think about it, that is a massive shift from even 5 years ago. I mean, it's incredible to think how much things have changed. Now, again, different industries are moving in a different pace with this. But so therefore, how do you think about retention? Well, it comes down to the flexibility that's personalized. It comes down to recognizing that people might want to work on a different project. So it's creating opportunities within the organization. Look, all of us have to do things in our day jobs, which are not exactly thrilling. That will never change. I can't see a moment when that will change. And we all know that. But also there is a percentage of our time where we want to be doing something because we are passionate about it, or we're really good at it, or it's an idea we'd like to trial. I think space for that kind of thing is going to be on the rise too. So that, sure, there's an X percentage of your job which is just the daily grind. There's another part of your job which is more interesting than that, and that's possibly been picked out specifically for you. And then there's a little piece of your job on the top, probably last in line, but okay, which is, this is the thing I wanted. Sure. It might be a training course. It might be, whatever it may be, a special project, something you want to do on your own, some research, whatever that may be. I think those opportunities are going to be on the rise. And I would suggest that they provide great opportunities for organizations. All of this is positive. I don't want to make this sound as though, we're just going to be overwhelmed by a whole bunch of snowflakes stamping their feet about what they demand their employers do for them. I don't think people are, ridiculous in recognizing that they have to, give value for what they're being paid. I think that there's a lot of energy in individuals that businesses can harness much, much better. And I think it's interesting that this is, in a sense, it is a sort of bottom-up employee-driven initiative rather than something that's come from chief execs. And with no disrespect to our elders and betters, the C-suite in many, many industries, has to move outside of their own comfort zone. Things are changing and they need to respond to that faster than they ever have before.
It sounds like a recognition that people are more three-dimensional. It's less of a straightforward transactional thing. People are people with lives and talents and aspirations. Vicky, you mentioned a move from job to work, and I love that simple idea. What does that mean in terms of career path? If I'm no longer looking at my job title as a mark of my progress and my success, what does that mean in terms of what I can look for the coming years as an employee? Are career paths going to change? Is the idea of a career path over now?
Well, I think it already is long gone in most industries. I mean, there are a few professions perhaps that we might identify where career paths are perhaps, remain linear, but that they are, even those industries, whether you talk about something like law, which came up at the beginning of profession, even those industries are being shaken up. Things are changing. Digital is impacting in even traditional roles like accountants and lawyers and so on. So yes, I think, we all know the job for life thing is long gone. None of us have experienced that. So, we already have got used to this notion of a sort of portfolio career, for example. And I think people are a lot more comfortable with that. People don't have the loyalty to their bank that they used to. So why would they have the loyalty to their employer that they used to? People are much more comfortable about moving around. Technology has enabled us to matchmake, dare I use that analogy, in a new way. So I think that people are looking, and it may well be that they're thinking to themselves, what, perhaps I want to jump out of the labour market for a while, to take a sabbatical or to have children or to do another degree or whatever it may be. So actually that projectization of work it is going to be a big driver, but I think there's very much less fear around that with younger generations than there might be of somebody of my age.
Sure.
So yeah, I think people are going to feel that's just part of flexibility. And as we've already heard, the notion that flexibility might be, well, instead of starting at 9, you could start at 9:30. I mean, that is no longer flexibility. That is far from flexibility. So it's not just flexibility in how you organize, the autonomy to organize your work as long as you deliver. To see presenteeism, just go, because it isn't any longer about the hours you do, it's about what you do. And then beyond that, even moving from either projects within an organization or jumping around from organizations on a contract basis, doing projects for a fixed term, and kind of not having the fear around that perhaps people would have done 20 years ago.
Neem, if we're seeing the rise in this project-based workplace culture and the idea of me joining a company at a certain job title and progressing up through job titles, if that idea is falling by the wayside, what do you think about the concept of a career path as we've previously known it?
I think it's right. We've had a definite uptake in when clients are coming to us, they want HR individuals that have reviewed the whole job grading, job banding. That's linked to comms and bends, to job content, to taking out titles completely. So I do think the traditional career path may not look like it has done. I still think people need to know where they're going to next. So even often we have candidates that are asking us or asking me, right, so if I take this job on now, when can I get to the next step? What does the next step look like? And they want an honest answer. Some companies don't know, especially depending on the size of them, but it's the opportunity and the vision that these individuals and these organizations can give these candidates. So I think from a career path perspective, it's not about if I hit this certain skill set, I'll get a pat on the back, a little bit more money and a fancy new job title. It'll be about, so this next step in my career, what will I learn? What will I be allowed to, what new skills will I gain, and what this organization will allow me to learn. Again, we go back to change management. We talk about bite-sized L&D, learning and development skill sets as well. But it's not just the hard skills, but it's those soft skills that I can then do if I stay on for another 18 months as well. So career paths are there. I mean, I know I'm definitely of the other generation, but people want to know where they're going, but they just want it much faster.
it's about redefining how we think about those steps and those markers of recognition. It's no longer a job title. It's what will I learn, feel as I progress through my career path.
With that, people still need those markers, but it's not a competition internally anymore. It's not like one person has to be promoted for somebody not to be promoted. Those things are completely out the window as well.
There are a couple of things. There are a lot of new roles being created. So a lot of organizations don't know where those roles are going to go in terms of what does the hierarchy or the career trajectory of this particular role or department or newly formed organization. So there needs to be a little bit of fluidity and flexibility with that as well. And also a lot of roles are getting very flat. So, there are quite a few organizations where you can be, kind of similar to myself, like a content strategist. A lot of us come with very different levels of experience, but we're also making sure that, each one of us can have passion projects that help elevate our leadership or help elevate, our global visibility. And that's something that I think a lot of leaders need not fear. If an employee is asking, I'm really passionate about this cause, can I do something about it? Yeah, go for it, because it's going to demonstrate leadership skills, delegation, team building, so many elements that maybe that current role is not really able to offer right now, or that next step is not very clear because it's a new role or it's a little bit of a flat team or a flat organization. So that is also another element of flexibility that we need to think about. We need to think about how we're engaging our employees in different ways so they can bring their whole selves to work, because that's what people are expecting now. I want to bring my whole self to work and be able to touch on the things that I'm passionate of, and also really good at as well. And how can that come to an intersection at the workplace? And I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. And that is also as a result of work invading my four walls of my sanctum, right? Like of my sanctuary, which is my home. Yeah. So I think how we're thinking about progression and seeing progression, I really do hope that this changes, because I'm personally sick and tired of the title chasing that is quite dominant, specifically in Asia.
Interesting. Even though that we think that is moving to one side, that title-focused career path, you think it's still being retained in some areas? Sure. Now, Olivia, as a communicator, how do you feel these ideas that we've just looked at are being expressed? If an organisation wants to share the message that it is taking on these new ideas, that it is changing its culture, that it does have a very human focused to real flexibility, how are people successfully managing to share this with the talent and the world more broadly?
Yeah, I know I poked fun at employee stories earlier, but these are the types of things that you want to actually have your employees talk about, or even have your senior leaders talk about very authentically. Having a senior leader talk about how they contribute to an affinity group in their organization is really inspiring and quite authentic, because you're speaking to something that resonates with that individual rather than the person's job. So I think what you want to do is bring forward conversation around culture, around what matters to that employee and what actually it is that gets that employee out of bed every single day to go to work. And yeah, sometimes it is the work, but also it's all the other things that come with it as well. So I think hearing from leaders, hearing from different employees, not just kind of an employee story of I work at this company, but this is what I'm changing. This is what I'm doing. This is, because my leader, gives me the autonomy to do my job when I need to do it. I've also got space to actually make a change in this organization. Right. And I think that's kind of the level of authenticity we need to get to.
I see. Neem, is this something you recognise, the need for that employee experience to be heard and shared as a way of future employees understanding what's on offer?
Yeah, I think attracting talent that way will be probably one of the only ways, as well as word of mouth, that's still a very strong part of getting people on board as well. So internal referral systems as well. I mean, interestingly, what Olivia said about employee stories, I actually saw something on LinkedIn recently. Grab have been, they've been in the forefront of their recruitment marketing piece. Some of the stuff they do has been, I haven't seen before. And one of their employees who used to work at Haze, so obviously I followed her, and she's actually left Grab after 5-6 years, and her farewell video about Grab would have made other people want to work at Grab. Now that is an amazing achievement, right? So that's Tash. And she did a whole montage of the 5 years and all the fun that she had had. That only gives, and she's the communications officer, so obviously it was going to be good, but it was a really different way of engaging new talent, but in a very authentic way. And that's something that, I see that all the time, but that's something that really grabbed me. So it's doing things, it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's doing things, well, maybe it is reinventing the wheel, I don't know, but it's doing things, the same things that we've been doing it, but delivering it in a different way.
Just ask as well. I saw today on LinkedIn that Google actually ran a poll on LinkedIn, just saying, what is it about the recruitment process at Google that you want to find out more about? How can we help you? So it's not necessarily promote your brand, promote your organization, talk about yourselves. It's how are we helping you be a better version of yourself? Amazon did a brilliant content series where they actually had short, 20-second videos where it was interview tips to help the candidate along the journey. So if you feel like that an organization is actually looking out for you before you've even joined it, that makes me want to think about them a little bit more as a potential employer, right? So I think, number one, if you don't know what to talk about when it comes to your talent brand, ask your audience. What do you want to learn more about? Do you want to know about our affinity groups, our culture, how we support charities or the work that we're doing? Like, I think that's one thing that we actually don't use social networks enough for, is really the two-way conversation. And that's really the best starting point.
I'm keen to get some more of Vicky's reflections on this, which are always valuable. Before I do, that there's a thing you mentioned there, Neem, that has prompted a question I have. You've mentioned, well, we've all been discussing movements of employees and people arriving, people departing, a great sort of mobility. Is there something about the way in which companies say goodbye to people? Is there something about the way in which we facilitate and accommodate people's departures that separates informed, innovative companies from more traditional ones?
Yeah, 100%. So we're going to lose people. Everyone is going to lose people. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that in a bit more detail about why. But how you say goodbye, when I started a few years ago, as soon as you handed in your resignation, people would stop talking to you. Your boss would take it personally. And it used to be a big deal. And we can't afford that. Even from take out the human kindness element, we can't afford to do that in a digital age, because as one of your colleagues, Paul, mentioned, you read the negative comments straight away, right? Glassdoor, all these things that Gen X and the millennials are looking at, Gen Z, sorry, and the millennials are looking at. So I think how you say goodbye to an individual is about keeping that door open, whether keep that door open from a human touch point of view, but maybe they'll go out, learn new skill sets and come back and absolutely smash it again in your organization. So exit interviews, I think, are imperative. So doing an exit interview for everyone, be they a regretful leaver or not, it gives them a good opportunity to explain why they're not happy, but hopefully you've got enough processes in place to have notified it beforehand. But people do leave, so let's learn from it. Let's learn from it from a future perspective, but also give them a good way of saying goodbye. And that way they will always bring out they'll expand your name in the market, in their network, through social media. And it won't be a negative way of saying goodbye. But yes, absolutely. How we say hello and how we say goodbye is just as important.
Vicky, so many more strong ideas being brought to this by Olivia and Neem. Any additional thoughts that you have?
Yes, I mean, and I think the goodbye is going to become more important. We've talked about this notion that people are going to be moving around. And I so agree with what Neem was saying. very often someone is leave. I mean, of course, things can just go wrong between an employer and an employee, and obviously that, that's a bad situation. But as often, people leave because there's a great new opportunity for them, and frankly, you should feel proud that you've got them to that place, that you've facilitated them in their journey. And absolutely, if that's a positive experience, there may be another time in their journey when they come back. And I've absolutely had personal experience of that. I've had to wave off brilliant members of staff that I've been really, really sad to leave. And then I've been absolutely delighted 3, 4, 5 years later when I've been able to rehire them into a different role. And they've come back, with some great new ideas. They've been able to think more broadly, learn some new things, experience new ideas, and they can bring those back to your organization. So yeah, absolutely. If people are leaving, although it's never fun, hopefully it's because they're going on to do something new and better, and that should be something to celebrate.
We're coming to our last sort of few minutes of this section. So if there's a question that's been sort of needling away, do feel free to share it there in chat, because we do have a little more time. But there's something that we've mentioned a few times over the course of our conversations this afternoon. We keep mentioning purpose, and it's one of those words. Always good to see Vicky's cat make an appearance. Hello there. This word purpose keeps cropping up, and I think we're all familiar with the idea of it, and we see it expressed in different ways. Are people becoming more critical, more questioning of when a company says it has a purpose and when it actually really genuinely means it and feels it? Olivia, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, the role of purpose and of purpose being recognised as a meaningful thing.
It's interesting because I kind of predominantly consult in the world of tech, and that's just where purpose, your culture and your values is a no-brainer, that you have to have that as an ironclad, piece of communication for your organization. And I really think that when we look at other industries, a lot of these kind of purpose statements are incredibly vague, and it's for one campaign and one campaign only. Whereas when I really believe in seeing a purpose statement from an organization, it's through multiple touch points. It's through, how does their leadership speak to, for example, how did someone say goodbye at the organization? I think we are getting so savvy at looking at Glassdoor, LinkedIn, so many different channels to get a lot of different perspectives on how an organization actually, behaves against its purpose, that, we really need to take into those other channels into account. And that's just where content is key. For example, Pinterest showing their latest parental leave policies. That shows that they have a deep, deep ethos and really care about, their employees, where they really want to be on the forefront of developing these policies. And it actually takes over 60 pieces of content, or rather a candidate engages with over 60 pieces of content from one particular company before applying. Mm-hmm. So make everyone count, and make sure that you're not just restating your purpose statement, because that's just going to fall on deaf ears. Show, not tell.
Neem, people becoming more savvy to genuine purpose, or purpose just as a one-hit marketing strapline?
I think when it comes to people wanting to start in an organisation, I think how they question me as a recruiter, how they question an interview, that will give them a bit of an idea of what the purpose is and make sure it's clear. It gets them through the door, as Olivia mentioned about, they see a lot of content before they're actually interested in applying for that organisation. But I think purpose really comes into its own when retaining staff. So if I talk about Haze, I've worked at Haze for many, many years, and part of our I think it's up here, lifelong partner, but also part of our purpose is creating opportunities. Now, that obviously we're talking about candidates, introducing them to clients, but from a purpose, it also has to practice what it preaches. So are they creating opportunities for me as an employee? And yes, they have so far, which is great. So I think from retaining staff, you know, when you're externally talking about we're an amazing organization because we believe in this, it's the people that are already in that organization. They'll be saying, well, okay, you're saying that to everyone else out externally, but are you doing that internally? So I do get lots of questions about purpose, but I think it's really about the reasons people leave is because they've lost their purpose within that organization.
That speaks to Olivia's point about, you know, bringing your whole self to work. You know, I mean, that's what people want to be able to do. And that's what I think, if you want to attract, retain, and perhaps sometimes say a fond farewell to the very best people, you've got to enable the whole person to show up. And that is just no longer going to be a kind of just for, you know, the very, very, you know, few employers. That's something that every organization is going to have to take a real look at.
I am so grateful to the three of you for bringing to this conversation all the ideas you have. We've covered things that I thought we'd cover, but we've also brought along ideas that I didn't realise we'd focus on today. Ideas like the speed and the agility with which we make these decisions. The idea of the C-suite sort of losing its own silos and merging together. There's been some really strong ideas, and I'm so grateful to Neem of Haze and to Olivia Kane of LinkedIn for bringing everything you've brought to this. Thank you so much, both of you.
So much fun. It went so quickly as well. I've got lots to talk about. The yoga's going to have to wait till next time. I'm sorry, until you invite me again. But really interesting as well, Olivia. Thank you.
Go to our LinkedIn and mention it there, and we can.
I'll mention it on LinkedIn. Thanks.
Right.
Thank you, guys.
Vicky,
thank you.
So many ideas we've looked at there. It seems only fitting to give you the sort of the final word on this one, as someone who kind of sits at the heart of so many of these conversations. What ideas have meant most to you over our conversations this afternoon?
I think authenticity. I think that's come up in all sorts of strands, you know, right through from you know, the very beginning of your engagement with an organization and all of the work that Neem does with her clients and candidates, you know, Olivia, in terms of how you communicate the messaging and the fact that, you know, that has to be authentic, and there shouldn't be a different message to different stakeholders. You know, if you are that organization, you're that, whether you are an employee, a customer, an investor, whatever that may be. So I think the authenticity piece is really important. And I would just say, you know, if you're driven by valuing your people, everything else should fall into place wherever you are on your journey. Recognizing that you are nothing without your talent, and that talent has legs and it can get up and walk away. So, you know, for every reason, for business reasons, for human reasons, ensuring that your people and your people's strategy is at the heart of your thinking at whatever part of your digital journey you're on, that should give you the right kind of North Star to guide you.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's been so much of value today. And I think that idea, as you said, authenticity, this stuff sounds good, doesn't it? But actually making it real, actually making it demonstrable and transparent. It's a tough challenge, but I'm so glad that we've touched on that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Not easy to deliver. And for every leader, you know, this is a time consuming, you know, this is a lot that you have to take on as a leader to try and deliver this. But yeah, it's the journey's worth it.
Wonderful. Vicky Knight, always great to talk to you. Always great to have your ideas. So thank you so much for being part of this chat today.